Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, from wherever you're joining this webinar from. Welcome to the Mpala 30 webinar. We're celebrating 30 years of existence, so we're very happy to start this Science Week with a webinar. Before we start off, we have some house rules. The webinar will be recorded and it shall be shared at the end of it all. Please put all your questions in the Q&A question and answer function so that we can manage the questions effectively. If you have any technical difficulties, please send a direct message to Joseph Irura via the chat. We'll run this show as follows. We're going to have some opening remarks, a keynote presentation from Dr. Patrick Omondi of the Wildlife Research and Training Institute, and then we'll have presentations from principal investigators who have worked at Mpala. Last but not least, we will have a question and answer. So enjoy the webinar. So while you're waiting for 4:30 to reach when we officially begin, we shall be playing a video from one of the research projects that have happened at Mpala. Zoe, please play us that. Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for the giraffe show. So we start our webinar. Welcome once again, everyone who has tuned in. We're very happy to have you today. I'm happy to see the speakers, and let's begin our webinar. This is the webinar by Mpala Research Center in Laikipia County, and we're celebrating 30 years of existence and very happy to be part of this today. My name is Dr. Nina Wambiji, the Chief Research Officer at Mpala, and today we're going to hear more about Mpala. Mpala is in Laikipia County. We have 48,000 acres of land. This area is semi-arid savanna, And we also live within, between livestock. We have livestock and wildlife in the same space. So it is a living laboratory where all livestock, wildlife, and people live. Mpala Research Center was formed in 1994, and it is a center that has 5 partners. We're managed by Princeton University, the Smithsonian, Kenya Wildlife Service, National Museums of Kenya, and the Wildlife Research and Training Institute. There's a variety of research that happens in this space. We have research on savanna ecology, we have research on socio-ecological research, applied ecology, ecosystem ecology. We also have One Health research where we look at interactions between the wildlife and the people and the livestock. We have genomics, we have endangered species. There's a number of species on this land. We have animal behavior studies, and last but not least, range management. Over and above this, there's more science that is able to be done in this space. We also work with a wide variety of scientists. We want to grow the critical mass of younger scientists, younger researchers to keep up on the science of this landscape, be conservationists for the future. And you have an example of Dedan Ngatia there, who works on the Samburu Wildlife Wild Project. We've got the Kenya Long-Term Exclusion Experiment that began in 1995 that looks at different, if you exclude different animals or different species on a land, what happens? We have the Insect-Plant Interaction Laboratory with the student Amy Gaitho, and also Robert Angila working on the CLEAD project. We also have other students who are working on the birds in the system, Kennedy Kipkorir, who looks at the Vulturine Guinea Fowl project. Mpala since 1995 has grown by leaps and bounds. We at the moment have 746 publications, peer-reviewed, and last year alone in 2023, we had 48 papers. So there's really a lot of science that is produced from this land. I will, because this today's meeting is about understanding what we need to know when it comes to doing research, what permits do we need, how do we go about it? That is why we're here today. And I welcome Mr. John Gitonga to take us through this slide.
Thank you, Dr. Nina. So my name is John Gitonga, and I'm Mpala's research liaison. And to just explain how we are able, or our role when it comes to permitting, is that the first step when you intend to work with Mpala Research Center, we have the Mpala Research Advisory Committee that will review your proposal. That is after you fill in a form of your intention to work at Mpala. Then we look at the appropriateness of your research, depending on our mission. And if it's in conflict, then we might not be able to accept you to work at Mpala. Then there's the issuance of, if you're happy with your work and it's in line with our mission, then there's the issuance of affiliation, both for NACOSTI and also to support you whenever you want to interact with other permitting bodies. We guide on the process, and also we create linkages to enable you as a researcher to work with various stakeholders. So the first shop would be NACOSTI. They would also review your proposal. And then once happy that your study can be carried out in the country, then a NACOSTI permit is issued. There will be two types of researchers that we accept. I know we talked about various thematic areas, but for permitting, we think of them from a two broad perspectives. There are those people who would be working more aligned towards wildlife. But then when you have a human dimension within your project, then the human people squarely working on human subjects, then you would need an IREC, visit one of the independent review committees, and then they would review the appropriateness of your study as well. And then an IRB or the independent review board report would be issued to you, and then the approval is given. For those, and that is most of us who are here, is that you work hand in hand with WRTI, the Wildlife Research and Training Institute, and the Kenya Wildlife Service. I put them there jointly because there's an aspect of approval of your research as well when you make an application to WRTI. Then you will develop the prior informed consent and the mutually agreed terms. And then if you end up needing to export, if your project entails export of samples, then a material transfer agreement is issued or is developed. And all these are in conjunction with the Kenya Wildlife Service, WRTI and Kenya Wildlife Service. Then capture permits and then the export permits for those intending to go all the way to that step. NEMA is also not left behind. This is National Environmental and Management Authority, and they will review the agreements for compliance with the access and benefit sharing. And then when satisfied, they will issue with the access permit. So this is in a nutshell. Most of the bodies, NACOSTI, WRTI, KWS, and NEMA, they would have more details on their website. We also have a small direct guideline on the steps and the forms are on our website. When you go and click on Mpala's website, you'll be able to see some of not in so much detail, but you're able to see what you need to do. For me, that would be all. That would be and then back to you, Dr. Nina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gitonga, for taking us through that process. We welcome researchers to work at Mpala, and by welcoming them to Mpala, we also have to follow the laid down procedures that have been set up by the different permitting bodies. So I'm very happy that I know that NACOSTI is in this meeting, WRTI, where we are going to have a keynote speech from the director. NEMA is around, and KWS. So thank you so much. That is in a nutshell what we are doing. And now I want to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Patrick Omondi. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Patrick Omondi, is the director of the Wildlife Research and Training Institute. He's an experienced ecologist with over 30 years of experience in species conservation, planning and management, and has published widely in peer-reviewed journals. He's also a skilled international negotiator on natural resources governance and represents Kenya in several global conventions, including the Convention of Migratory Species, CMS, and the Convention of International Trade in the Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES. He's also the current chair of IUCN National Committee and a member of the IUCN African Elephant Special Group. Welcome, Dr. Patrick Omondi. Dr. Omondi will be speaking. The theme of today's speech is Navigating the Permitting Landscape of Kenya. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you, Nina, and good morning, good afternoon to participants of the webinar. And thank you for the introduction. I am sending my greetings from Nakuru County, specifically Naivasha in Kenya, where the Wildlife Research and Training Institute is located. I have a few slides just to share with members to talk through the subject. So when the director for Mpala Research Center reached out to me to speak to this webinar during the Science Week for Mpala Research Center, I think she carefully chose this very important subject, navigating research permitting landscape in Kenya. And I felt that I need to make myself available. And thank you, Winnie, for making this possible, so that we can engage and try to clarify the gray areas, because there have been a few challenges, I have to admit, in the research permitting landscape in Kenya. Before I get to the permitting process, maybe for those that do not know the country and how the country conservation is arranged, Kenya is about 582,646 square kilometers. That is the land area of the country. And we are about 51 million Kenyans in that landmass. Of that area, about 8.25 is under wildlife conservation. Is protected either as national parks or national reserves. And 11% is under a network of conservancies, what we call community wildlife conservancies. And we have 2.4% under the protected area. So if you look at that, we are slightly over 20% of area under conservation. And the government is putting strategies to increase the conservation area network under the global framework, the 30-30, to get to 30% coverage for conservation. And a rider to that is that the protected area system are not closed system, they are open system. We don't have fenced national parks or national reserves that are open, and it comes with its challenges, and I will talk to that later on. It will also be important just to share so that as I build into the permitting process, the governance structure of the wildlife sector. The wildlife sector is run under the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife currently. And the ministry is basically to formulate policies governing the sector and also regulations that enforces the policies and the laws that make us work much more efficiently and professionally. So it's an oversight. Under the ministry, we have two state departments. The wildlife department sector is under the State Department of Wildlife. The ministry is under the Cabinet Secretary, State Department under a Principal Secretary, which is like the lead administrator for government in the sector. Then below it, there are implementing agencies, two government implementing agencies, the Kenya Wildlife Service, which is mainly involved with management and law enforcement, is the management authority for Kenya, managing national park directly and oversight over national reserves and community conservancies. The lead in law enforcement, anti-poaching, and the KWS is one of the lead paramilitary wildlife protection unit, not only in Africa, but globally, and very success stories when it comes to anti-poaching. Then more recently, the government created the Wildlife Research and Training Institute with the mandate to coordinate wildlife research, all forms of wildlife research and related wildlife issues. And we also do training, competency-based training in the sector, and given the mandate also to issue wildlife permits. And the other one is to establish a national wildlife database, bring all the information that we've done for Mpala, for example, 30 years of research. There are research that has been going on, Amboseli Elephant Project over 50 years. We have baboon projects bring all this information into one national data portal so that together in the sector, we can synthesize from the peer-reviewed papers what can inform better management and policy development in the sector. So those are two government agencies that are involved in the sector. Then there are two other very key institutions. There's the Kenya Wildlife Conservancy Association. This is the umbrella body that brings over 200 community conservancies together. And these are community conservancies that now have added additional 11%, slightly over 11% of the country into conservation. And this, the group that consider wildlife as a land use, that it is the livelihood driven, they derive benefit from wildlife conservation. And it is very important that they are all brought together. They are in one group with the CEO and a very clear governance structure. And it's the only way we can increase the wildlife space. Then all the NGOs that work in Kenya have come up again together into a Conservation Alliance of Kenya. And it's a group with the CEO again, and easy to coordinate with government because there's a CEO, there's a chairman, and it is registered as a limited liability umbrella body incorporated under the Companies Act. Currently, they have 55, comprising international NGOs, national NGOs, and CBOs with the 55 members. Main role is advancing the preservation, protection, and management of wildlife and their habitats. I want to talk slightly about the Wildlife Research and Training Institute so that as I build into the permitting landscape, you get it clearer. Coming July 1st will be 3 years old, 3 years old. And the research function of Kenya Wildlife Service was hived off because many that know Patrick, I was a director of research at Kenya Wildlife Service. And the government felt we needed to have research independent of management and see whether we can bring research to inform management, not only of national parks, but management of national reserves and management of community conservancies, that they can use science to direct their management. So we are created by an act of parliament and section 55 of the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act 2013. And our mandate is to undertake, we do research and we coordinate wildlife research. And as I said, we have also a mandate under the TVETA, which is a training regulator to train a competency-based training on wildlife courses at a lower level. So all our functions is listed under section 52 of that act, and it entails all forms of wildlife research, enhancing capacity. Section 59, we are given the powers to grant wildlife research permits. And under section 61, we are to establish a comprehensive wildlife database in collaboration with the Kenya Wildlife Service and other related lead agencies and stakeholders, including Mpala, so that that information can inform the management of national parks, reserves, and address the emerging priority issues in the wildlife sector. And then the Institute now is the scientific authority for most multi-environment agreements, including the Convention on Migratory Species, CITES, Ramsar, and we offer advisory. So Kenya Wildlife Service remains a management authority for these mayors, and we are now the scientific authority, and that is the international practice that you separate the two institutions. And I think that was one of the major reasons that the government of Kenya found it wise to separate the management and the science. And we see how we marry the two to inform the sector. So we are located here in Naivasha. That is our headquarters. And we have 4 field centers and sub-centers to address specific agroclimatic research thematic areas. We have Savannah Arid and Semi-Arid Ecosystem Center in Sabo, with 5 sub-centers in Masai Mara, Meru, Nairobi, Amboseli, and Marsabit. Then we have also Marine Ecosystem Center in Malindi, with a sub-center in Shimba Hills. We have a Montane Forest Ecosystem Center in Muiga, with centers in Kakamega and Kitale, and we have the Inland Waters and Wetland Center in Naivasha, with a sub-center in Kisumu and Nakuru. So we are spread across the country, and the way the centers are administratively formed is based on specific agro-acclimatic research thematic areas. Now, how have we organized ourselves, to coordinate research? The first thing we did is to develop the first ever National Wildlife Research Agenda. This agenda was, most of the participant must have participated. It's available online at the end of this presentation. And the reason why we needed this agenda is because previously the research we do was very uncoordinated, with the limited access and sharing of data information. So we needed to come with a way of identifying priority areas that are relevant to the country and could address the emerging conservation issues. One of the things that often they were disconnected from prevailing needs of wildlife conservation and management in the country. So we have the first National Wildlife Research Agenda. And I think for many, we need to align to this, and while developing your research programs, it is good to visit it. So we formulated the agenda to coordinate wildlife research, to enhance the provision of scientific data and information to support wildlife conservation management decision and formulation while addressing present and emerging wildlife conservation and management challenges. And also, this agenda will finally help us establish a national wildlife database, a national data portal that will ensure that good information, for example, get a mechanism of making sure the peer review, all the 48 publications from Mpala must be having good recommendation that could inform management, not just only from Mpala, but for the country. They can be replicated. There are some that can inform policy. We as researchers, we could be monitoring and researching, and we can research a species to extinction because of not having science to communicate to management and to communicate to policy. So our role is to look at what are there in these peer review papers that could inform management, and can we make it available to the managers of parks, to the managers of community conservancies and the county reserves. So this is the place to be if you want to have an impact. If you don't want to monitor and map connectivity to extinction, that there will be no corridors to be there, then provide this information and ask us to make it available to guide policy and management. So we have a number, 7 broad thematic areas in the agenda. I don't want to dwell onto it so that I can go to the main subject of today. If you want to accept that agenda, you can visit our website and you'll get it and read it into detail. Now, we have procedure for wildlife permitting. And I think Gitonga talked to it slightly, but I will want my colleague, Dr. Vincent Ogbanda, which heads the permitting process, just to take us through the way the permitting process is organized. But before he does that, I want just to talk to the way we are organized. We have the National Council for Science and Technology and Innovation, NACOSTI, and I think they're on this website. That is the regulator of research in Kenya, not just wildlife research, but any research, be it on human, be it on livestock, be it on wildlife. They are the overall regulator of research in the country. As we are a clearinghouse for NACOSTI when it comes to the wildlife issues in Kenya. We clear the research if it is in line now with the national research agenda and everything is okay, then we clear it for NACOSTI to issue a license. Then we have KWS. KWS is the management authorities, the research provider, oversight over wildlife, and they also the people who issue capture and CITES permits if you have to export genetic samples. Then we have NEMA. And I know that is where the challenge has been, because many players have a challenge in how to navigate these 4 institutions. And I will be talking on how, as a country, we are organizing ourselves to make sure we address the emerging challenges that have arose. So I'll want to give my colleague Obanda just to talk through, it's just that one slide, how the permitting process landscape works. And then I can go to the last 2 slides to open the discussion. Dr. Obanda, please.
Thank you, Director. I'll quickly, I hope I'm being heard.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'll quickly just give a brief on this process. Initially, this process started when we were still at the Kenya Wildlife Service, but when this function was domiciled at the Wildlife Research and Training Institute, we came up with a procedure, a process that actually can guide this process. So we are the starting point. You start your permitting process in Kenya at the Wildlife Research and Training Institute. We receive your applications. Once we receive the applications, we register the application. We notify you that we have received it. We review it. We review the application. And in our review, we are not reviewing the scientific merit only. That's not the main focus, but we are looking at the impacts of your research on the wildlife, including ethics, including overexploitation, including what is already happening in the area that you are planning to work on. And so we'll advise, and once it is satisfactory, and we also check whether your research will require prior informed consent or mutually agreed terms. Not all research require PIC or MAT. And so once your research, we determine it does not require PIC or MAT, we proceed directly to issuing that permit. However, if your research requires PIC and MAT, we advise you to be guided on how to obtain and submit a PIC and MAT. Once you submit the prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms to our office, then we can issue the permits. We issue permits based on an executed prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms. Now, the function of the institute is to take lead in the negotiation of the PIC and MAT. This negotiation includes the resource provider, which is the Kenya Wildlife Service, and either the county government or the community where you are going to work, where your research is going to be domiciled. They are parties to these agreements. Once we receive and we issue you a permit, you are now free to obtain a NACOSTI license. Although you are free to proceed to NACOSTI license before us, but it's advisable that you get the permit from WRTI, then you proceed to NACOSTI to issue with the license. And after that, if your work requires that you will collect samples, the plants, or you'll capture animals to collect blood and any other sample or tissues, you are required to proceed to Kenya Wildlife Service to obtain capture permit or plant collection permit from Kenya Wildlife Service. If it does not require you, you can proceed direct to NEMA. However, after obtaining the capture permit or the plant collection permit, you are also required to proceed to NEMA to obtain access to genetic resource permit. NEMA will grant you this permit, and once you get this permit, they can only issue this permit if you have the prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms. They are the focal office that receives these documents and forwards them to the international offices. Once you receive that, you can now proceed to conduct your research. However, when you are doing your research, it is important that you report to the Kenya Wildlife Office or the local area managers and to the scientists to verify, especially if you are collecting samples. Thank you. Director, you may proceed.
I'll go to the last slides. We have received numerous complaints, and I think they revolve around two issues: multiple government institutions with independent legislations and very conflicting issues. And I think sometimes you saw the flow chart. There are certain scientists that start with NACOSTI. NACOSTI then refers them back to WTR. Then you go back to WTR, you come to KWS, NEMA, and that process. So we are trying to come up with a one government stop shop in the conduct of wildlife research. And for NACOSTI, it is online. WTR, we are getting online by next month. And KWS is getting online. And NACOSTI, I hope they are here, they are coordinating us, and we'll get into one government, one portal for all the wildlife research permitting process. If it gets there, I think it will be easy. I think the technicians can easily direct you to where you need to go after where. And I think that is our dream as the agencies involved in the sector, to make the conduct of wildlife permitting more efficient and facilitate the conduct of research in Kenya. Then there is delays in PICMAT development. We ratified Nagoya Protocol in 2014. And our law says if you ratify an international treaty, it becomes part of the Kenyan law. I have to admit, Nagoya Protocol and the PIC and MAT issue is linked to access and benefit sharing. There are indeed challenges on prior informed consent. One, because multiple players are involved. You know, as an institute, we only provide the technical support. KWS is the resource provider and takes the lead. So we are trying to talk to our policy driver to develop the regulations so that the law, the Nagoya Protocol can be made more efficient, you know, so that you don't need to be going to 7 counties. If an elephant is collared in Samburu and is ranging in 7 counties, then you need to go there. We need to get an efficient way to get the PICMAT process done. And this is the other one that is linked to us and we're trying to address is lack of awareness. Sometimes you are a researcher, you go to a county, they don't even know what you are talking about. So there's a lack of awareness to the resource providers and some of the users. As an institute, we have prioritized that, and I'm going to talk to the last slide how that is going to be done. So to address those challenges I mentioned there is that we are trying to, and the ministry will be helping us develop wildlife research regulation, and with more focus to domesticate the Nagoya Protocol to streamline the PIC and MAT. In the interim, we have developed guidelines for us wildlife research permitting in Kenya through a participatory approach, and those guidelines are being implemented, and we are making them online next month. We already linked it to the e-citizen, the national e-citizen. We are in the final tail end to link it with our softwares at the institute so that it becomes much more efficient. But to address PIC and MAT, we are talking to the ministry to prioritize the wildlife research regulations so that we can see how we domesticate Nagoya Protocol to streamline the PIC and MAT, particularly as it relates to the resource provider versus the user. Then sensitization of stakeholders, top priority, and as an institute, we are going to decentralize. All those 4 centers now will be having permitting offices. So that is easy for our scientists to engage, easy to be informed, so that we can be able to make this process much more efficient. If we decentralize the permitting process, you should be able to be helped to engage with the counties and get the PICMAT process much more efficient. I've talked about developing an online portal. We are at the very tail end. Hopefully by July, we'll be up and running. One government approach, NACOST is leading us. But we get there, again, that will resolve the concerns that people have. And the setting up of the research permitting offices in the field centers. I'm sorry I had to take a bit of a longer time, more than the 20 minutes, but I thought it was worth it. Thank you, and I take it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omondi, for this very insightful presentation. And just to have the whole procedure laid down, the flow chart was very easy to be understood, and something that we will, continue using for ourselves and for the upcoming scientists who require permits. A number of questions have come in, but most of them you have answered. But it's just good to, state some that have been requested to be answered. There's concern about how long can it take? What's the general or the average time that a permit can take? That's one question that has come in. There's also an issue with the county. Yes, you have informed us that there's awareness that is going to be created, but that still seems to be one of the questions that is being asked. How can the counties, the peak months are becoming very problematic to have, to get signatures from different counties who the officers may not be aware or not understand the process. So it takes a long time to get these signatures, yet research is based on a project or a proposal that you have written that has timelines. Thank you.
If I can address the issue of timeline, and it is all spelled in the recently approved guidelines by the Board of Trustees of the Wildlife Research and Training Institute. We want to give it from start to end. If we follow that flowchart end, a maximum of 3 months. Maximum 3 months. I know currently it takes a longer time, but with our online, and if we follow making the templates easier, and Abanda, I think you'll also talk to that, the challenges you have experienced with the paperwork, and what can make us go beyond the 3 months with all the systems we have put in place. Take your application from day one, give us a lead time within 3 months. If we can do it, if it doesn't require pick and mat, as you saw in the chat, and you just come to my office, I have no permit to approve on my desk. They don't stay there. So if they come, I sign them off and I can create a day. So they don't sit in my office at all. So if the paperwork is done, and I'll want Vincent to talk to it, what will create delaying beyond 3 months? Because I've seen some chat questions that some applied in May. Now we are getting to July, it is over 3 months. What could be the problem? So Vincent, what could be the delay? What will cause us delay beyond 3 months?
Yes, what will cause the delay, especially on the PIC, there are two processes. There's the registration and technical review. The technical review should not take more than 60 days, because that's just to review and then inform you that your papers, your application documents are in order. However, at that stage, there could be a little delay when the applicant is not having the requisite documents, especially the ethical approval document. You want to do an experiment, you want to take some samples from an animal, but you don't have the ethical approval. So that one will take you time, because we don't issue the ethical approval. The ethical approval is either applied and received from your home institution or in another institution. Secondly, at the PIC level, I want to make it very clear, the Wildlife Research and Training Institute comes in to guide in the negotiation, brings the parties together, that is the providers and the users, in a sitting to be able to come up with a legal document called prior informed consent. Once the parties agree that we are the parties in this document, they are released in the hands of the applicant to proceed to sign. Now, the delay can be at the county, or it can be among the parties that were listed in that document. For example, an applicant might have included Mpala research in their proposal, but Mpala is not aware. Now, it is going to be the first time that the applicant is saying, we used your name and we won the funds. Now, we would like to incorporate you in this process so that you can be party to this issue. That can cause a delay. Another cause is where you introduce a commercial institution. For example, an institution that is just doing a service to your project, for example, sequencing. And sometimes it's not clear whether they are party to the research or they are just doing the service. So sometimes it is how the project is designed. Some studies are global or continental, but then the component that is being done here in Kenya is only a small bit, yet the applicant did not declare that this is a global research or a continental research. And so all those issues can cause a delay. And so this is case by case. Some studies are very complex, some studies are very straightforward and clear. Nowadays, there are a lot of studies that are multidisciplinary. You have the livestock, have the human, and have the wildlife. And all these sectors have to be party to it. So if you go to the human or the livestock sectors, sometimes they are not even aware of what you're talking about. And so those are some of the challenges.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Obanda. Thank you so much, Director, Wildlife Research and Training Institute, for the keynote speech and for the education that you have passed on this evening. We have listened to you. We have understood the mandate and the functions of WRTI. We've understood the challenges that may have been and the procedures that need to be followed, or what we can do to solve these problems. So in the interest of time, because I know this can be very interesting, we have put out the question and answer box. So please continue asking questions there. Both Dr. Obanda and our keynote speaker, Dr. Omondi, are available. There's colleagues from NEMA, from NACOSTI, from KWS, who can be answering these questions as we continue with the rest of the presenters. I now want to bring in presenters. We have Professor Susanne Shultz. So I'll just do a quick introduction. This seems to be so before I proceed, I see Priscilla, you have a comment. You have your hand up. A quick one.
Yes, a quick one. Just wanted to give an issue that has been giving us challenges when drafting the contracts. And this is on a conflict of IP policies at the researchers' institutions, which take time to. From the other side, they want their policies to be followed. From Kenya, we have laws that are binding us, and we are not able to take that. So this is something the researchers need to understand what the laws of the country provide for, and then understand before as they do the proposal, they understand that the laws in Kenya provide for this, and therefore when we are negotiating the contracts, there are some aspects of IP which have to change what their institutional or policy IP state.
Nina, if I can introduce Priscilla, is a senior research scientist and bioprospecting expert, and she's our lead officer on PIC and MAT advisory in the institute. So the issue of IP as it relates to the researchers and IP as it relates to the country has been also a major cause of delay, that back and stop. And as I said, we are taking 3 years. Our next year is aimed at making the conduct of research as efficient, help us to make it much more efficient. That is our determination. We want research to be done in Kenya and to make it inform these emerging challenges in the sector.
Thank you so much, Dr. That is very encouraging, and I believe all the scientists on this call, all the upcoming scientists, all the scientists who are getting this, and we will work to make sure that everything works efficiently. So I want to introduce Professor Susanne Shultz. Susanne will be our first presenter. We have 3 presentations. So I start with Professor Susanne Shultz, who holds a chair in evolutionary ecology and conservation biology in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Manchester, the UK. She holds a PhD in biology from the University of Liverpool, an MA from the University of Stony Brook, and a BSc in anthropology from the University of California. Her main research area is understanding how wildlife population responds to anthropogenic changes, and this involves using a toolkit of physiological, immunological, behavioral markers together with spatial niche modeling to identify patterns of resilience and the risk of consequences of land use and water management. I'll let Professor say more about what she's going to tell us today. Her topic is on using ecoimmunology to understand species response to environmental change. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you very much. Let me just start. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me or allowing me the opportunity to talk today. I just wanted to start by giving you a little bit of my history at Mpala. So I first came to Mpala about 20 years ago as a student on a field course with two people that I think are in the room, so Truman and Isabel, Lynn Isabel. And ever since I had that experience at Mpala, I'd always wanted to come back and have a research program at the site, because it is a special location and it offers researchers sort of an unparalleled natural laboratory to answer questions. So I just want to start by saying how special I think Mpala is and how motivated we are to try and work with Mpala and the authorities to do research in an equitable way. So what I was going to do today is just to talk a little bit about the research that we've done at Mpala and the research that we are hoping to develop over the next few years. And then finally end with a slide about our permitting journey and what our experiences have been during the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So the current projects that we have running at Mpala, sorry, let me just see if I can get rid of that. Cover a number of different topics. So one of the topics we're interested in is using macrophysiology, or looking at population level variation in health and resilience. So we're using a number of tools, including diet, reproductive hormones, stress, and immune function. And essentially what we're trying to understand is niche dynamics and marginality. So what happens to species when you push them into the edges of their physiological tolerance? And the next main project that we're engaged with involves looking at zoonoses, and particularly waterborne diseases at the human, livestock, wildlife interface. And I have a student who's also on this call, Andrew Halls, who is working on prevalence of Giardia, Cryptosporidium, amoeba, and coccidia in livestock and wildlife across the landscape. And that's these two maps that I've shown are an example of some of the sampling sites that Andrew has visited and collected samples from. So as you can see, he's working across properties. So on Mpala, Loisaba, Koija, and Ilmotiak. And we've actually found a lot of spatial variation in disease prevalence, which is really exciting, but also raises a number of challenges. The third area of work that we are actively pursuing is looking at gastrointestinal nematodes and understanding their impact on immune function in both wildlife and livestock. So this is involved developing non-invasive immune and inflammation markers. And Alice Burton, who is also on this call, is a PhD student that's working in this area. So I just want to say that although I'm sort of the PI, the work that's being done is being done by students and postdocs in my group. And finally, we have another PhD student who is a Kenyan national that has a Commonwealth scholarship, and she's looking at filaria infections in livestock and wildlife, and particularly thinking about other smaller bovids rather than just cattle and buffalo. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the work that we've managed to do. So one of the projects that we've just published on is looking at diet, microbiome, and behavior shifts across populations. So evaluated diet and microbiome shifts. These are the areas that we sampled. So Mpala, Loa, Oljogio, Pejeta, and Westgate. And what we found was that there are more extreme diet shifts seasonally in poorly performing populations. So this was looking at grevy zebra and rhinos. And that also where we had these diet shifts, the species that were relying more heavily on fallback foods are performing more poorly, or the populations are performing more poorly. And the reason that I brought this work up is because we started this work quite a few years ago, and we're just getting to the point of publishing this work. But at the time, working across counties, so Westgate and Lewa are not in Laikipia County, the permitting process was a lot more straightforward. So these large-scale projects were much easier to manage and to get approval for. What we're doing now is using a lot of eco-immunology approaches to understand health and welfare and animal responses to pathogen communities. And the idea is that we have these wildlife and livestock that are exposed to different environmental challenges. And these environmental challenges interact with the innate immune system. So not only is it about pathogen exposure, but it's also about the environmental conditions that animals are in that will affect their ability to mount immune responses, or appropriate immune responses to different parasites and pathogens. So although we're primarily looking at gut nematodes, we are interested as well in vector-borne diseases. And just to give you a little idea of the kind of results we're getting, so Alice Burton, who is on this call, has been looking at inflammation and immunoglobulin markers in livestock and wildlife. And really interestingly, we found that livestock and wildlife seem to be responding very differently to these pathogen burdens. And it raises the question about how appropriate are sort of domestic models for understanding health impacts of parasite and pathogen burdens in wild animals. And again, this is a project that is based in Mpala, but we are working across the landscape on some of the neighboring communities around Mpala, and would like to be able to move across counties. And finally, I just want to tell you a little bit about some of the direction of travel, so where our research is going. So we recently were successful in applying for a Darwin Initiative funding to look at understanding the impacts of pathogens on wildlife and livestock, but also trying to engage more with communities to understand their perceptions of disease transmission risk from livestock to wildlife, and understanding how well their knowledge covers the impacts of disease on wildlife. And the idea with this project is very much to try and capacity build, and to have an equitable model where we're working with communities, with Kenyan collaborators, and very much focused on trying to get to an endpoint where we can advise and make recommendations for policy and for management decisions. So I'm completely 100% sympathetic to the earlier comments about needing to do wildlife research that has some impact, and we're very much motivated to work in this direction under sort of equitable partnerships with Kenyan institutions. To the best of our ability. Another project I just wanted to bring up that we aren't doing in Mpala, but we are involved with work in across Europe and in South Africa, looking at the impacts of interventions on physiology. So really trying to understand how movement, translocations, and reintroductions impact on both stress hormones, which is the conventional way to look at these problems, but also looking at reproductive hormones and immune state as animals go through these transitions. So this is an area that I'd be very keen to develop with KWS and WRTI. So finally, I wanted to just end by giving you a brief summary of our research and permitting journey. I put a map on here just to make the point that we are working in a number of different countries. So we have active projects in China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Spain, UK, Hungary, Tanzania, Kenya, and South Africa. And I think, some of so for me, one of the frustrations is the difference in the permitting process in Kenya as compared to some of the other countries that we're working in. So just a potted history of our experience. So in around 2006, I had a PhD student, Nick Harvey, who came to work with black rhinos. And he was collecting samples and doing hormone analyses and microbiome analyses. And as was said earlier, the permitting process was reasonably straightforward. He received his research permits within 3 months. We were hoping to export samples, but I don't think we actually followed the procedures as well as we could have. And so export permits weren't issued, and we did all the hormone work in country. Following Nick, we also had Danny that overlapped with him. She was a postdoc who was doing a similar project, but focusing on the grubby zebra. So this was some of the work that I presented earlier. And again, the research permitting process was reasonably straightforward. We didn't ask for an export permit to export samples, as we had established a functional lab at Mpala, which I think is long-term a very positive thing. Following from Danny, I had then master's student, Alice Burton, who's now a PhD student. Again, her permitting process was reasonably straightforward, and she was able to, within the space of a 1-year master's project, get her permits, come to Mpala, collect samples, and and actually work with existing samples as well, and have some really nice results, which has led to her moving into a PhD. So then we come to our current situation, and our current situation is that we've made life more complicated for ourselves because we're trying to think bigger and more holistically. And I've sort of termed this under the shared landscapes projects, which this is working with communities, social scientists, Kenyan collaborators, multiple institutions, and more students and postdocs. Actually, we'll be hiring a postdoc soon on this project as well. But at the moment, we have 4 PhD students. We either have current or completed 5 master's students. And when we first started, this is post-COVID, so we couldn't travel in 2020 and early 2021. But as soon as Kenya came off the red list, we started the permitting process. And the first permits for the initial group of master's students and PhD students was reasonably straightforward. But where we've had massive hurdles is finishing off our pick and mat. So we circulated initial drafts in February 2022. They're still not signed. And I'm not saying that any individuals at fault, because I accept some blame for the delay. Our institutional issues have caused delays. I'll go through a list of where I think the problems are. But this affects not only our ability to do the work, but the ability for students to complete projects, for us to meet grants, deadlines, and also importantly, for us to get through the permitting renewal process. We're still asking for sort of dispensation because we don't have this pick and mat process completed. So what do I think the problems are, or what are the problems that we've experienced during this process? I think the first one is that when we first started, we wrote a pick and mat using previous example documents, but there wasn't a universally available template. And I think having the template come out, I think it was in the summer of 2022, was really, really helpful, because actually there's an agreed language, there's an agreed structure, and an agreed content, because the initial drafts, the content wasn't, what we were meant to be putting in the document wasn't very clear. The next thing that has caused massive delays, and I'm glad that it was brought up just before I started, was trying to negotiate between university regulations and regulations from the Kenyan side. And these aren't trivial, and it's not as straightforward as just going to the university and saying, we want you to change all of your regulations, because as a public body, they have obligations. University of Manchester has obligations to the UK government and to the UK public finances. So particularly we've had issues around liability statements. So the University of Manchester refuses to sign unlimited liability documents. Absolutely. So they will sign with, it's not that they want to necessarily limit liability to an inappropriate amount, but they will not sign unlimited liability documents just as an institution. IP issues have also been a topic of contention. I think we have managed to get the university to compromise, basically because after quite a lot of involved discussions with a lot of different parties at the university, it was agreed that actually the asks from the Kenyan side were not unreasonable, but they do, the ask from the Kenyan authorities are in conflict with the normal university IP decision-making. The next problem that we had was with defined investment and benefit sharing. So to set benefit sharing up front was problematic, but I will say that the process has actually really helped us think about how we can collaborate more effectively. And through this process, we now have a Kenyan PhD student. We have funding for a Kenyan master's student that should be starting very soon. We've thought about how we can supply training through either workshops or hosting students in our lab. And we do have more Kenyan collaborators names on grants than we had previously. So actually, I think, this has actually been a real positive on our side in making us think about how we can do this cost effectively. I do just want to say that funding Kenyan nationals remains a massive challenge. So, we've managed to get a Commonwealth scholarship, and I've managed to get funding from the university to support a master's student. But this, it's not through a lack of willing that we're not engaging with more training. It's just that the difficulties of getting funding. And then I want to just say finally that it's come up in the question and answer session, but one of the massive challenges we're having is how to deal with the users and providers and the partners and who should be the signatories on these documents. Because, if they're meant to be long-term documents, having every party that may possibly be involved in the project over the next 10 years means that we start adding counties. Our pick and map went to KWS, and they have now asked us to have signatories from all the properties that we're collecting on, but we need to be able to do that flexibly. So if we only ask for the properties that we've already collected samples from, that's potentially impacting on our ability to flexibly manage the projects to do the best science. And I also am concerned about asking local community conservancies to sign a legally binding document, because I don't want them to feel like they're being pressured into signing something that they're not comfortable signing. And then finally, I think there's been an issue with communication. So, sending emails and getting timely responses, figuring out who exactly the right person is to talk to about the different requirements. Changing personnel has meant that, documents that are agreed by one person have now had to be re-reviewed by new people as they come into office. And I understand that these things happen, but I think this is a product of how long it's taken, that there will be changes when you're dealing with a document over sort of two years. So I think with that, that's all that I had to say today. But I just want to reemphasize that we're really, really keen to try and get all these documents agreed. We have goodwill on our side. I know it may not appear because it's taken so long, but it's like we're really keen to facilitate trying to get these things completed. So it isn't a lack of willingness. It's just a very complicated landscape. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you. And I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Susanne. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to make all the presenters do their presentations, and as the questions keep on coming in the Q&A, the presenters will be answering so that we catch up with the time that we have. Next, we're going to have Dedan Ngatia, who's a PhD student and has worked on multiple projects spanning from small carnivore conservation, domestic dog ecology, rabies vaccinations, and African wild dog conservation. Currently, Dedan is the project leader for the Samburu Laikipia Wild Dog Project, managing of a team of 10 staff members, working also across Isiolo, Laikipia, and the Samburu counties. Dedan is also a PhD student at the University of Wyoming, who advised by Drs. Rosie Woodruff and Dr. Jacob Gohin. Welcome, Ngatia.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nina. I hope you can hear me. So I think my job will be very easy. I think what I want to do today for the next few minutes is to take us through the foundation of the Samburu Laikipia Wild Dog Project, which is a project that has been running based at Mpala for the past over 20 years. And just to mention is that this project was founded by Dr. Rosie Woodruff. I don't know if she joined this meeting or not, but I'll give some details on how everything happened, and I hope I'm not going to take a lot of time. So first, just brief history about African wild dogs, that they're endangered, second most endangered carnivore in Africa after the Ethiopian wolves. But this is the African map, geographic map that I was talking about. And what you're seeing on green is where African wild dogs currently exist. That's only 70% of their historical range, showing how much the range has collapsed over time, which is also equivalent to how the numbers in the population has gone down over the past century or so. But I think the foundation of African wild dog research work in Laikipia is explained better on this work by Rosie Woodruff over 25 years ago. And the graph shows the population status of African wild dogs on the x-axis, and the number of people they're exposed to on the y-axis. And amazingly, what the results show that is when we have a lot of people, or big population of people, then there's a big chance that African wild dogs might go to extinct. But on the left of that graph, we are showing that provided the population of human being is not as big, is not as much, then we can have viable or thriving African wild dog population. And this is what founded the African wild dog research work in Laikipia many years back. So for over 20 years, between 1980 to early 2000s, there used to be no African wild dogs spotted in Laikipia. And amazingly, I think a single park showed up in Laikipia in the early 2000s. And that is when the Wild Dog Project was incepted with very basic questions on how can we ensure that the few individuals that have come stays here. But second, how also can we ensure that the population of wild dogs keep growing? But additionally is how can we ensure that because we have lots of people, pastoral communities who depend on livestock subsistence for their everything, how can we ensure that they can coexist peacefully? So the Samburu Laikipia Wild Dog Project came up with lots of ideas, bringing communities together, working with Kenya Wildlife Service, working with local communities, working with local vets, doing monitoring itself. And the main goal was to try and boost the population of wild dogs, which, as I had mentioned, has been missing in the landscape for so many years. So the foundation of the whole work was just to answer one question, because we have a landscape. We know about the human wildlife livestock coexistence in our study area, in our landscape. You know, all these guys are integrated. We have pastoral communities with their cows and goats, and then we have lots of wildlife, and then wild dogs are coming in here. How can you ensure that we have coexistence between wild dogs and people? Also considering that people need livestock for daily subsistence and all those things. And from working with communities, working with Kenya Wildlife Service, working with so many other partners, the population of African wild dogs, as you can see in that graph, rose amazingly over close to 10 years, to an extent that the population was recorded to be fifth largest population of African wild dogs in Africa. But also, at some point, it was recorded to be among the best thriving populations of African wild dogs outside protected areas, showing that the integration between all those conservation interventions really worked well to ensure that people and wildlife, and mainly African wild dogs, survived in the same landscape, but not just coexisting, but more so coexisting peacefully. But I think the big question to the achievement of that goal is then how was that achieved? And this was achieved by one, understanding the main threats to African wild dogs, which included conflict with farmers, infectious diseases, connectivity, and now more recently, there are lots of issues with climate change. And the main goal of the project over the 20 years that the project has been running was to ensure that we can curb mortalities to African wild dogs from all these causes. Now, this represents close to 20 years, more than 20 years actually, of wild dog research work in Laikipia. And so I will not be able to talk about all that. So I think I'll just mention very briefly on some work that we've done on managing infectious diseases and a little bit of what we are doing to ensure that African wild dogs, or rather to understand how rising temperatures are affecting African wild dogs. So as I talk about diseases and conflict, I came to realization that domestic dogs is very important in both causes of mortality in African wild dogs, and I'll explain how. But because I'm not going to talk about conflict, we know that local communities, local herders have lots of livestock with them, and they use domestic dogs to deter the predation of their livestock, sheep and goats. But also, domestic dogs have a very key role in disease transmission to African wild dogs, which has been one of the key causes of mortality to them. So this is a study by a PhD student in our project close to 10 years back. And what she did was went around Laikipia collecting serum samples from different carnivores and doing seroprevalence, basically trying to estimate exposure to rabies. And you can see from the left, from the graph, is that none of the carnivores that she sampled, including wild dogs, jackals, hyenas, was persistently exposed to rabies virus. Doing the same at the same period to domestic dogs, you can see that domestic dogs were persistently exposed to rabies virus, which gave one big idea that probably it was domestic dogs that were circulating the rabies virus, which has been affecting wild dog population, not just in Kenya, but in so many parts of Africa as well. And this informed the startup of the Laikipia rabies vaccination campaign, which most of us would be aware about. And the goal has been to vaccinate as many domestic dogs as we can, of course, ensuring that we are getting the right coverage, of course, ensuring that we are bringing in some good science to show how well we are achieving our targets. And the targets is one, to get to zero rabies deaths to African wild dogs, and also to get zero rabies deaths on human beings, because apart from affecting African wild dogs, rabies also affects people and so many other species. I'm not going to talk so much about rabies because it's a different thing by itself, but we've achieved that. We have reduced wild dog deaths. I think for the past close to 8 years, we've not recorded even a single wild dog death from rabies. And our team can also confirm that human rabies deaths have also gone down. And I think cumulatively we vaccinated over 100,000 dogs over the past 7-8 years, and we are continuing to do this. So rabies has been a problem, and we know how to sort rabies. We know we need to vaccinate as many domestic dogs as we can, but we don't know how to handle canine distemper virus, which is a virus, again, that crushed our African wild dog population in 2017. Now, the graph that I showed you just a minute back. Katie Kreger did the same for canine distemper virus, and none of the species, including domestic dogs, was chronically exposed to canine distemper virus, which raises a lot of questions on our knowledge, our understanding on how canine distemper virus is transmitted from who and to who. How does it get to African wild dogs? Whom should we be vaccinating to prevent the virus from spreading to so many other species? And that is the discussion we've been having over the past 1 to 2 years. So if you can still hear me, we'll jump. I will now jump into, sorry, I think I was disconnected a little bit there. So Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So, so let me jump very quickly to climate change and just describe very briefly on how on our results from climate change. And it's just recently that a couple of years back, we started realizing that rising temperatures have been affecting African wild dog population. And it's just in Kenya, in so many countries, including Botswana, South Africa, where we have some stable African wild dog populations. So we know that infectious diseases and persecution by people are killing wild dogs. But recently in 2021, one of our PhD students shows that actually African wild dogs are dying more from both causes when it's hot. And that was now the kind of key guideline towards us trying to push it more and understand how exactly this is happening. And, you know, we have some results from many years back showing how African wild dogs population viability and, you know, and the viability success has been affected by rising temperatures. And one of the things we've shown is that when African wild dogs den, when it's hot, then they kind of take longer to den again, showing that hot denning periods can delay future African wild dog reproduction success, which eventually ends up affecting population growth. Again, when dogs den when it's hot, we've shown that they tend to yield fewer yearlings. And this is not just a result in Kenya, it was conducted by Rosie both in Botswana and Zimbabwe. And a yearling is a dog that manages to achieve 1 year of age. And we're showing that African wild dogs, and if they den when it's hot, then we tend to have lower success of them achieving 1 year, which again ends up affecting future population growth and everything else. Again, not just puppies, African wild dogs are affected. Adult wild dogs are affected by temperature. Showing here, these are collared dogs in Ngatia, and we showed that survival is highly reduced when it's hot for adult wild dogs. So we are showing that African wild dogs, puppies, and adults are all affected by rising temperatures. But now the big question is, how is that happening? Is it because of their hunting success is being affected? Is it because the immune system is being affected? Those are the big questions we are trying to respond to right now. And there's a big project which just ended, and we'll have lots of results coming through in the next few years. So, and at the moment, we are trying to figure out how African wild dogs might cope with rising temperatures, whether it's through behavioral plasticity, whether it's through changing, you know, roaming close to water, whether it's changing their hunting patterns. And as a result, when we figure out that, then we'll provide some guidelines on how and what other African wild dog ranges can do to contribute towards reducing the impacts of rising temperatures on African wild dogs. Sorry about the connection hiccup, but I think I will end at that because of time interest.
Thank you so much, Dedan, for taking us through the research on wild dogs. I don't know how many people in the audience have seen them or have had an idea that they are found all across the African continent. So this is also a session for education and awareness. We can go home this evening and know that you have learned something about immunology and also wild dogs. I want to thank the two presenters, Professor Susanne and Dedan, for the presentations that you have made today. I see that in the interest of time, we're supposed to finish a minute. We are just a minute to finishing. So before that happens, I want to invite our Executive Director, Dr. Winnie Kiiru, to say something, and also thank our, while I'm still holding the microphone, so to speak, want to thank our presenters today, starting from the keynote speaker, Dr. Patrick Omondi. Thank you so much, sir, for finding the time to come and speak to us about the permitting landscape, and to have two scientists to speak about the work that they're doing, and also by extension, the permits or the rules and regulations that they have to follow. So welcome, Dr. Kiiru. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Good evening, everybody. As we come to a close, I would just like to echo that gratitude, because really, I think this has been one of our first webinar, and I'm very happy with the way it has been informative. We have learned a lot from WRTI, and also you have all enthusiastically joined. These webinars are part of our strategic objectives. One of Mpala's key strategic objectives is to develop the capacity to enable all the scientists who work with us, domestic, international scientists, to conduct research efficiently and ethically. And that efficiency is very much affected by the permitting landscape. So one of our key initiatives is to really create strong partnerships with WRTI, KWS, NACOSTI, NEMA, and all these permitting organizations so that we can facilitate faster and more efficient research permitting. And this webinar was really one of the ways in which we think that if we start talking to each other, because dialogue matters, we can be able to catalyze some of these efficiencies. I think we've both heard each other. We've heard what WRTI has to say. WRTI has heard what our scientists have to say. They've heard that the research is impactful. It is good for science. It's good for Kenya because we are bringing in all these students, Kenyan PhDs, to work in this research environment. So for us as Mpala, as we continue to try and achieve our strategic objectives, we want to work together to collaborate and ensure at the end of the day that all of us have a better outcome. I'm sure that WRTI wants a smoother process, and our researchers are committed to doing the right thing. I want to appreciate, I have seen Ira joined us, Mzee Ira joined us from Panama. I have seen Truman, and most importantly, the chair of our board of trustees, Ali, joined us from Princeton. So we've had a fantastic group of participants. It is really heartwarming to see over 150 people join our webinar, and they're still on. 121 of them are still on up to now. That to us is a sign of success, and we are thankful. We don't want to keep you any longer. We just want to say we are grateful. Thank you very much. And watch this space. We hope to do this again and again because we believe that dialogue matters, and it will help us to improve the efficiencies that will make research good for us and for those young Kenyans that we want to bring into this space, and really for those discoveries that will keep our lives, our wildlife, and our people alive. Thank you very much and have a great evening.